All right, listeners, welcome to February ERcast. I'm Drew Kelno, bringing us in with Matt, DeLaney, Andy Little. Gentlemen, how is the month going? And more specifically, how is your work-life balance doing?
Ooh, that's a hot term to start the show off with. You know, boys, some days it's good and some days it's not great. I don't think I've cracked the code, but I do feel like I'm better now in terms of work-life balance than I was 5 years ago.
Yeah, I'm going to go with Matt, although I realize that part of my problem with work-life balance is how often I measure it. And so I measure it a month at a time, because when I was where Matt was, days are good, days are bad. It's really easy to get stuck in the bad couple of days. But now when I measure it for a month, it's like, all right, so how was it? How did I do this month? I feel a little better about the fact that it's like I had 5 or 6 really terrible days, but I had 5 or 6 really awesome days. And so, yeah, it's about as good as it's been. But it, as Matt mentioned, it's gotten progressively better over the last 4 or 5 years. Drew, how about you?
I kind of think of work-life balance the way I do raising children in my early 40s, mid-40s, which is the days are long, but the weeks are short. So sometimes when I'm through a string of shifts, it's can be rough, particularly if there's a bunch of administrative work and other stuff going on. But overall, things seem like they're pretty well balanced, a good amount of family time, a good amount of work time. But it brings us to the idea that this is an increasingly prevalent topic that we're running into in medicine, particularly with more junior physicians and learners coming on board who seem to be pushing farther into the idea of using the term work-life balance to essentially say, I don't want to work as much.
Yeah, it's tough. I hear this more and more. I have the pleasure of working with learners, but I do feel like increasingly each year, it's more of a focus. You hear this more when you interview people. You know, work-life balance is important to me. I don't think that phrase left my lips when I was applying for residency. And so even in the past kind of 15 years since I've been out, certainly there's been a shift with more focus placed on what happens in the hospital and also outside of the hospital.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, as you guys both mentioned, people bring it up on a pretty regular basis now when they interview. I'm looking for a place that allows me to have work-life balance. And I've been kind of the old guy on the porch where I'm like, well, training's not for that. Training is to train to become an expert in emergency medicine. And if you can find some wellness along the way, cool. But we got to train you to be good because we have standards we have to meet. And then if on the back end we need to, ratchet down the time you spend training when you graduate and work, maybe that's where you'll find the balance you've been looking for. And to where there's a term that I came across actually as I was reading this article and speaking with some other folks is I feel like that wellness has been weaponized to get us where we are now, where they have weaponized this term wellness and what it means to where it's led to where we are. So.
Yeah, so Andy, you just alluded to an article, which is where we want to take this conversation, but it's not just learners, it's newer physicians in practice also that are very specialized, very capable physicians. So this was an article that came out the end of 2024 in the Wall Street Journal, got a lot of attention. Young doctors want work-life balance. Older doctors say that's not the job. And it's essentially the coming to a head of these conflicting wants, needs, desires. So you have the practitioners, the physicians, the older ones are saying it's our job to be on call, to be omnipresent. We're taking care of patients. Essentially, the medicine is a calling, and that is my life. With the younger physicians saying, it's my profession. I want to do it. I want to be good at it, but I do not want it to be all-encompassing. And let's not forget, in the middle, the need of the medical care system and the patients we're taking care of, which does require, ironically for us in emergency medicine, I think we really understand this, but it seems like others don't always, 24/7, 365 care.
Yeah, it's interesting. Andy, you said it well that you want to train folks to be excellent. And what I see sometimes get lost in this talk about work-life balance, especially once you get out of residency, is there's less focus on being clinically excellent. And I don't care if you work 2 shifts a month. I don't care if you work 22 shifts a month. I really do want, when I have an emergency, my doctor to be excellent. And so what I've tried to focus on in my own practice and have talked to folks about is whatever balance looks like to you, if you're not interested in being excellent at emergency medicine, that's probably a time not to adjust the knobs a little bit, but actually to take a hard break and really look at stuff. But I do worry that sometimes people say it's a work-life balance issue when really it's an overall happiness, life satisfaction issue that no matter how many shifts you work spills into your work. That's my concern as the new generations come out is, are we saying that medicine is really the problem? And I would argue it's not. Usually when people are having a hard time, it's mostly a life issue. And medicine is part of what we do. as part of our life. But I am cautious about blaming medicine for all these problems.
Yeah. I love you bringing that up, Matt, that it's, the things that are the problem are not always the things we think they are, to where it's I think we all have those colleagues that we'll talk to are like, oh, emergency medicine has changed so much in the last 15 years, or medicine has changed in the last 15 years. And my answer is it has, but it hasn't been incremental of enough change at a time for it to be drastic to change your attitude this much. Like it's this slow, like half a degree change that gets us to where we were 15 years ago to where we are today. But our lives can change dramatically quicker, whether it's, I have to work more because I want to spend more, or I have an issue with a spouse or another personal relationship, or there's a death in the family. Like there's so many external factors to where medicine is the easy one to dump on for why we're not happy, but it probably isn't the major factor. So I like you bring that up.
Well, then there's the real risk of skill atrophy. And we've got literature in the surgical subspecialties that the more surgeries you do, the better you are. In fact, surgical outcomes are better in some situations on a Friday as opposed to a Monday when the surgeon has been off. Emergency medicine, I don't think, is quite as tied to the number of touches as some surgeons may be. But I do feel like if I'm working a string of shifts, I'm better on shift 4 than I was on shift 1. Just my motions between the rooms, my efficiency. So, Drew, is there a sense of, if you're dialing up an ideal work-life balance, is there a minimum number of shifts you feel like you need to work to stay excellent?
I don't think it's a number of shifts. Now, granted, I have a very hybrid role as a physician, right? I work clinically a little over 50% of the time, and then I have academic and administrative jobs also. But what that does is it means that I'm immersed in the idea of practicing medicine on a regular basis, right? So I'm working with residents in the emergency department. We come up with a topic conversation. For example, the other day was the utility of lactates in seizures, and should we be getting it or not? So I went home after that shift or the next day, and what did I do? I spent a half hour doing a lit search on it and looking into it. Now, I'm not working clinically, but I'm still immersing myself in medicine and doing that little bit extra work to keep myself engaged and to make sure that I am staying up to date on the best practices, the best literature. And I think that kind of gets to a key on something I talk about with applicants applying to our program as residents, but also new attendings coming in and applying for jobs. And the question I get asked a lot is, what are you looking for? What's your ideal applicant? And in emergency medicine specifically, I kind of say tongue in cheek, but also somewhat seriously, you can teach almost anyone to be an emergency medicine physician. What you can't teach is the intrinsic drive to be a great emergency medicine physician. I think that gets back to what you were saying, Matt, is you either have to spend the time constantly doing it by working shifts, or you have to have that intrinsic drive to continue learning and pushing yourself to be better. Our specialty is so wide and so deep in so many areas. You can't just skate through and be consistently good.